brother Benz. Why is it a bad thing to have something like the USA that sounds on the surface of it? You just saw the big crocodile tears they're crying on MSNBC. It's for humanitarian projects. It's for development projects. It's to help bring water to the village. And that's a pretty good cover. Why is USA? Why do we rip the mask off and say it's a CIA? And what is the advantage to the American people? You mentioned that it gave the money to a same sort of folks throughout the world. Who are those folks, and why is it an advantage to the populist nationalist movement in the American working man and woman to basically rip the mask off, face what it is, and then shut it down, sir?
Well, this is a very, very complicated question, and I really hope that Trump world foreign policy folks understand the open heart surgery they're conducting on the way our foreign policy operates around the world. And in terms of why it's a bad thing that USAID does what it does, this is one of these questions that, you know, I've known and followed this stuff for many years, but I never made a crusade about taking it on until USAID got in the business of censoring the internet. And at that point, and censoring Americans on the American internet, and censoring American social media companies as a foreign-facing humanitarian NGO sponsor, that everyone knows is just the CIA's plausible deniability layer and funding conduit. But when it started to be used against Americans on American soil, that to me was the final straw. That no matter how useful it may be to spend $40 billion a year bribing warlords in Africa, bribing oligarchs in Ukraine, bribing and recruiting terrorists in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Syria, disguising medical supply vans, in Venezuela with boxes of AK-47s and military supplies. The fact is it is no longer a foreign policy instrument. It is a domestic control instrument, and that is the final straw. You can't do that to Americans.
Do you have any evidence in all your research, because you're like the axe in this space, that it's actually been used domestically against Americans, not just for doing warlord stuff like that, but actually against Americans?
Oh my God, yes. The USAID in 2021, they made a formal policy pivot to stopping disinformation on the internet. And they targeted U.S. technology companies. They targeted Facebook. They targeted Twitter 1.0. They targeted YouTube. They targeted all of the online information space. They were working with NewsGuard and Global Disinformation Index, and they were partnered with the State Department's Democracy, Rights, and Labor. They have which works with USAID's group called the Democracy, Human Rights, and Rule of Law. I'm sorry, Democracy, Governance, and Rights Bureau. And what they did is, under the banner of democracy promotion. See, this is the thing. They're supposed to be a democracy promotion organization. It's one of the reasons that they are accountable to the House Foreign Affairs Committee and Senate Foreign Relations Committee. They said that disinformation.
I know you got to bounce, but I just want to hold you through a short break and for a minute or two afterwards. I just want to make sure when we leave this today, people understand that you've made the case of why this place is dangerous and not some humanitarian thing, giving out money to like the nuns to save the orphans in sub-Saharan Africa. Short commercial has been on this idea about a government, an administrative state and deep state that's been out of control. Benz has been on this for years. So Benz, when they actually start to allocate money to domestic programs and to all the misinformation, shutting down free speech on the internet, like against War Room U, everybody, that money's allocated. We had this audience sat through the appropriations, the individual bills appropriations, and Eli Crane and Matt Gaetz making this case, I think back in the summer of 2024, 23 and 24 for two different authorizations bills. That time, less than 50% of the Republicans backed them. These things didn't pass in these subcommittees. Was anybody overseeing this? Did people on Capitol Hill know that they had started to use this to target American citizens, sir?
Well, let me clarify that, because there's a distinction here, which is that USAID does work that has dramatic impact on our domestic politics and domestic American to American affairs, but they funnel it through international organizations that operate on U.S. soil rather than rather than, for the most part, directly with U.S. organizations, although they do. For example, the USAID partner with the American Bar Association for, and these type of things. But for example, the USAID gave $27 million to the fiscal sponsor of the Soros prosecutor control group. That, everyone here, you talk about Soros prosecutors, and Soros funds these prosecutors, and then Soros funded NGOs, in particular this main one called Fair and Just Prosecutions. This group that tells Soros prosecutors what to do. Well, that group got more from USAID than it did from George Soros. They got its fiscal sponsor did $27 million to the Tide Center, which also played a major role in fomenting Black Lives Matter, as one of the main parent groups to the Black Lives Matter groups. You have to understand, USAID is at the dead center. It occupies the center space between the State Department, the Pentagon, and the CIA. It's a switch player that serves as a plausibly deniable assistance agency to the rogue activities of those three federal agencies, and it represents essentially the sum consensus of the foreign policy establishment, the legacy foreign policy establishment that hated Trump with a passion, wanted to take him down because of his foreign policy views and because of his economic nationalism here at home. And what USAID declared doctrinally is that populism is an attack on democracy. They say this openly in USAID meetings. They say this openly in USAID documents. I published this a year and a half ago. The USAID disinformation primer published the first month of Biden's term in office, saying that the purpose of their disinformation programs was to eliminate populist subject matter expertise on the internet, because populist news sites undermine USAID programming by undermining public faith and confidence in democratic institutions. Because, don't you know, USAID spends billions of dollars to control the media every year. All the major media outlets in Ukraine are funded by USAID, like the Kiev Independent. All of the major news outlets in Western Hemisphere or in many parts of Africa and Central Asia, it does what the CIA used to do. Everyone remembers Operation Mockingbird. Well, guess what? That's just called USAID Media Sustainability and Media Assistance. Okay, that's all that is. And when populist waves swept the world in the U.S. in 2016 with Trump, and with what happened all over Europe with Marine Le Pen and Matteo Salvini and Nigel Farage, USAID declared censorship holy war against every single populist group, including Bolsonaro. Steve, I'm telling you right now, if USAID did not exist, Bolsonaro would still be the president of Brazil, and Brazil would still have a free and open internet. It was USAID that spent tens of millions of dollars of American taxpayer money funding the push to get anti-misinformation bills passed in the parliament there, funding the legal advocates who pushed the censorship court there, the TSE, to crack down on Bolsonaro tweets and WhatsApp and Telegram messages. They built a censorship octopus in Brazil, and it was built entirely on USAID because USAID declared Bolsonaro a populist, Trump of the tropics, and then set up this operation to control the information ecosystem there. One of the USAID grantees even said on a public call that the purpose was to eliminate the international exchange of ideas between the Trump movement and the Bolsonaro movement. That's what USAID does. They kill domestic populism because it gets in the way of their foreign policy goals.